It has been 250 years since the first shots of the American Revolution were fired in the battles of Lexington and Concord. Now, a new documentary from acclaimed filmmaker Ken Burns and his team will take an expansive look at the virtues and contradictions of the war and the birth of the United States in an event that turned the world upside down. This coming Tuesday, you can get a preview of this epic 6-part documentary right here on WGCU PBS.
A shot rings out. No one knows where the shot came from. That leads to promiscuous shooting, mostly by the British. It's not a battle, it's not a skirmish, it's a massacre.
To learn more about this production, we're joined by the film's co-director, David Schmidt. David, welcome.
Hi, Sandra. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. So most of us think that we know a lot about the American Revolution. We learned about it in school. What do you think this film will teach us that we wouldn't find in a history book?
Yeah, I think I grew up in colonial Williamsburg, Virginia, so I thought I knew a thing or two about the American Revolution, and really that's all it was. I knew a thing or two. We know, all Americans know July 4th, 1776. A lot of us know that the war started in Massachusetts. There's Lexington and Concord, Bunker Hill. We might know that George Washington had his surprise victory at Trenton on Christmas Day, 1776. We might know that it ended at Yorktown. But there's 8 years of a war, and there's 10 years or more leading into that war of political strife that led to it, and there's a lot that came out of that war that I think we just aren't really familiar with. We aren't really familiar with why the armies were where they were, what the issues really were. I think we understand that the United States came out of this war, that it was a war for independence, but I didn't even know that it didn't start that way. It's right now is the 250th anniversary of the start of the war, and we all know that the July 4th, 1776 is the Declaration of Independence. There's a year plus of war before there even is that war aim of winning independence. It's about something else to start. And it just became what it became and became the creation of the United States through the course of what it took to win that war. And I think it's a really compelling story that I didn't know anything about, and I don't think a lot of people know a lot about.
So reading some of the promotional information from PBS saying that this revolution wasn't, just a fight for independence. It was a civil war and a world war, and millions were impacted beyond folks who lived in the colonies. Explain.
Yeah, the way Ken likes to talk about it, and he's absolutely right, is that our American Civil War, as we understand it, the one of the 1860s, was more of a sectional war. It was states against states more than it was brother against brother. There were instances of that, but it was really the case in almost every family, certainly every community. In different churches, the congregations were split. In the case of, for instance, Benjamin Franklin's family, he completely disowned his son, who was an arch loyalist, and was the royal governor of New Jersey and sided with the king as a result. Ben Franklin, of course, signed the Declaration of Independence and was one of the key founding fathers winning American independence. But that wasn't just a domestic squabble. People were actually shooting at each other. And there's an instance in our film where it's a man named John Peters, who lived what's now in Vermont. And before the war, he had lived there and had grown up in Connecticut. And there's a battle just outside of Vermont in Bennington, New York, where he actually has to kill his old schoolfellow and playmate. So these are people who knew each other before the war, and something changed in the 1760s and 70s that really drove them apart. So there's where we're talking about the Civil War. It became a war for independence, as I mentioned, through the Declaration, and turns out we don't want to be a part of the British Empire anymore. But in order to win that war for independence, the Americans had to, through Ben Franklin's work, get the French in on their side, and the French brought the Spanish in as well. So Florida is actually a really great example of both the Civil War and the global war aspect. Florida, at the time of the American Revolution, was 2 separate colonies, East and West Florida. The dividing line was somewhere around the Panhandle. West Florida actually extended all the way at that point almost to New Orleans. And Spain wanted it back. They had had Florida before the 7 Years' War, so they lost it in the previous war. Anyway, Bernardo de Galvez, when Spain entered the war, went to try to recapture Florida from the English, and he managed to take Mobile and Pensacola in one of the great battles, the biggest battle that I know of in present Florida. So yeah, it's and in terms of the Civil War, a lot of loyalists from the southern states in particular went to what's East Florida after the war, but then they got kicked out again when the British gave East Florida back to Spain. So they ended up in the Bahamas and Jamaica and other places that stayed within the British Empire.
I didn't realize that up through Canada and the Caribbean,
Yeah.
the Revolutionary War had significant impact.
Yeah, so the Americans invaded Canada in 1775. On the last day of 1775, they lost the battle for Quebec City, but they stayed in Canada and tried to take Quebec for another few months until they were chased out. Um, then, after the French entered the war, there were battles all over the Caribbean. As I mentioned, the Gulf Coast, there were battles at Gibraltar in the Mediterranean. It even extended as far as India when the French and British were vying for colonial control over the subcontinent there. So it really was in itself a world war. But then, of course, as we all know, the principles of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, became a rallying cry for anti-colonial movements around the world for centuries, really. Ho Chi Minh, when he declared Vietnamese independence, cited Thomas Jefferson. That's just a moment where the Americans had a ironic involvement on the other side, but it's happening everywhere. Haiti is an early one. The French Revolution is in its own way impacted, of course, by the American Revolution. So these thoughts are world spanning and have an impact. This is a moment that is, how should I say? This is a moment that really changes the world. And it does turn the world upside down. It's not just the United States' future. It's not just North America. It's tremendously upsetting for Native communities in North America, what will happen to them during this war and as a result of this war. But it's also a moment of tremendous change the world over.
So my understanding is that this film really tells the story through perhaps voices we wouldn't typically hear about, from not only from teenagers who fought on the American side, but German soldiers who supported the British. Are there any stories that really stick with you that you thought, wow, this is just such a compelling story that we have to get into this production that are still so special to you?
There are so many. Colonial America was a really illiterate place. A lot of people could read and write, more so than around the rest of the world at the time, which is great for us as filmmakers and historians because we can learn from their words and have a cast of actors that you wouldn't believe, from Tom Hanks and Morgan Freeman to Joe Keery and Maya Hawke. And there's so many names: Samuel L. Jackson, Laura Linney, Meryl Streep, who lent their voices to this film. But you mentioned a German soldier, and one story that just completely threw me by a loop, but really made this come alive was there's a German officer named Riedesel who was a general that fought in one of the British campaigns coming south from Canada, where they were forced to surrender at Saratoga, and his wife and three daughters came with them, and she chronicled her own thoughts on the trip, what she expected of America before she got there, and how surprised she was by how beautiful it was, the hopes that they had for an easy victory, and then after everything went wrong for them, how horrible it was to. She was she was hunkered in a building while somebody was being operated on for to have their leg amputated. And during the operation, a cannonball came and hit the building and took the other leg off, which is just such an unbelievable moment. She was also just hunkered in the basement of a building under assault with her three children, waiting for the night to end. And they made it. They did. but it's just, you don't often think about how bloody this war was. It's a war. Wars are really messy. It happens to be a war that gave us the United States, founded on such amazing principles that we all love and hold dear. But that doesn't mean it didn't come at tremendous cost all the same. And I think that the voices of the people who lived through it, that what they experienced at the time, what they wrote about, what they saw, what they did, help bring home that these are real people, that they lived through a tremendously hard time, that they sacrificed all that they could for it, and that makes me treasure it all the more.
David Schmidt, we so thank you for your time, and we thank you for your hard work on this project.
Thank you very much, Sandra.
For an inside look at Ken Burns' The American Revolution, tune in to WGCU Tuesday, August 12th at 8 p.m. Thanks for watching. We've got more great content for you, from news to the arts to the environment. So be sure to like and subscribe to WGCU's YouTube channel and follow us on our social media platforms for the stories that matter to you.